Hello fellow humans, today I'm gonna show you all how to use Linux. Let's first start by learning what exactly Linux is, and how it contrasts to Windows and Mac. Linux is not actually an operating system, but is instead a kernel. A kernel is basically the base structure that an operating system is built around. Then there is GNU Linux, which is a kernel combined with software, so a full operating system. However, people usually refer to GNU Linux as just Linux. So how does Linux differ from Windows and Mac? Well, first of all, Linux is open source. This means the code to Linux is publicly available, and anyone is allowed to modify or contribute to Linux's source code. This makes Linux a lot safer than Windows and Mac, because anyone can look for mistakes and security issues in Linux. It might seem like this would make it less safe, as hackers can look for security flaws and exploit them, but since the Linux community is so large, there are hundreds of people contributing and helping fix any security flaws they can find. Did I also mention you don't need an antivirus? Because of all this, there are many operating systems built around Linux. Some good examples are Ubuntu, Linux Mint, and even Android, but that one doesn't really count. These operating systems are referred to as a Linux distribution, or distro for short. The most used distro is Ubuntu, as it is very beginner friendly and has a super large community of users. What might surprise you is how much Linux is actually used, since while Linux only takes up about 2% of the consumer market share, its server market share is around 80 to 90%. Big companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and even most governments use Linux for their servers. This is because Linux has such an advanced command line, is less bloated, is safer, and is open source, allowing them to add whatever they think is best. So why should you use Linux? Well, Linux is much less bloated than Windows and Mac, and it will therefore take up less storage, and use less computer power to run, which means your computer will run faster, so if you have an old computer that barely works, installing Linux on it might give it an extra year or two of life. In fact, some distros still work on computers from the early 90s. Another big reason is that Linux is free. Unlike Windows, which is $100, and Mac, which requires you have an overpriced Apple device, Linux is 100% free. Now that I've explained why you should use Linux, let me debunk some misconceptions about Linux. A big misconception is that Linux is bad for gaming, and that if you like playing games, you shouldn't run Linux. This is not true at all, and while yes, a lot of games are only available for Windows and Mac, Linux has a tool called Wine, which allows you to run Windows apps on Linux. It also has a tool called Proton, which allows you to run almost every single Steam game in Linux, regardless of if it's Windows only or not. Another misconception is that Linux is hard to install. While this might be correct if you are using distros such as Arch or Gentoo, these are not meant for beginners. If you are using Ubuntu, not only is it easy to install, but I would honestly say it's easier to install than Windows. So now that I have explained what Linux is, and why you should use it, and have debunked some misconceptions about Linux, you might be interested in doing the switch to Linux. So I'm gonna show you how to install it. The first thing you'll want to do is to make sure you have a USB flash drive. If you don't, they only cost about $10, and you can probably borrow one from a friend if you don't afford one. Once you have your USB flash drive, install an app called Balena Etcher at balena.io/etcher and download the ISO image for Ubuntu. The links for both of these are in the description. Once you have Balena Etcher opened, and Ubuntu is finished installing, go to Etcher and select your USB flash drive to flash to, and the USB image to flash, which in this case is Ubuntu. Then click on Ready. Once it has finished installing, restart your computer, and before it finishes booting, spam your BIOS key. If you do not know your BIOS key, look up your computer manufacturer's name and then BIOS key. If you have a custom built one, put your motherboard manufacturer instead. If you still can't figure it out, it's usually either F2, delete key, or F12. Once you're in the BIOS, go over to the boot section. Your BIOS might look a bit different to mine, but what you do should be similar. In the boot menu, you should be able to find boot devices. Then move the USB flash drive to the top. If you can't find your USB flash drive, try disabling secure boot, and then try again. After that, restart your computer. Now you should see the GNU grub menu. Make sure you have Ubuntu selected and press enter. Now you should be in the install menu. You can either click on try or install Ubuntu. If you want to try the system out before erasing your old OS, then you can go ahead. Keep in mind if there's something about the UI you don't like, it can probably be changed. I'm going to click on install Ubuntu as I have no reason to try the system out. Select the language you want to use on the sidebar, then click on continue. It will now ask you for a keyboard layout. I have a Swedish keyboard, so I will select Swedish, but if you live anywhere else, select the keyboard layout that matches the country you live in. After this, I'll click continue. Now we get to choose if we want to do a normal installation or a minimal installation. I will pick normal, and I recommend you do as well as you are a beginner. It will ask you if you want to get Ubuntu updates while installing, and if you want to install third-party devices and software. Enable both of them and click continue. It will now ask you how you want to install Ubuntu. Select erase disk and install Ubuntu. Please note that this will delete every single file in your drive, so every picture, every app save data, etc. If you are okay with that, or have already made a backup, click on install now. It will now ask what time zone you are in, so just select where on the map you are. I am in Sweden, so I will select the Central European time zone. Click continue, and you will now be asked to enter information like your name, username, computer name, and the password you want to use to unlock the computer. Click continue, and wait for it to finish installing. Once it's done, restart the computer, and then plug out the USB flash drive, and Ubuntu will be finished installing. It'll ask a few things, such as if we want to use live patch or share info with Canonical. I'm gonna click no for all of them, but you can select what you want. I'm now gonna explain how to navigate and use Ubuntu. Looking at the top middle of your screen, you can see the day and time. Clicking on it shows the calendar and notifications you may have. On the top right, you see a volume slider, Wi-Fi bar, and also a power button to restart or turn off your computer. If you are using a laptop, the power button will also display your current battery. If you look in the left of your screen, you have your sidebar. Here you can pin apps that you can open just by clicking them, or click on the 9 dots at the bottom of the sidebar to open your software tab, where you can view every application installed on your computer. This is very similar to Windows and Mac, so it shouldn't take too long to get used to. Now you'll probably want to install some software, like Chrome, Discord, IDEs, or whatever else you may want to install. There are many ways of doing this on Linux. Most users use a terminal to do this, but it can be quite confusing for beginners. So I'm going to be showing you how to use GNOME software. It's an app pre-installed with Ubuntu. It allows you to install basically any app you want. Picture the Mac App Store, but it's actually good. To use it, open your apps menu and find software. Then search for the app you want. I'm gonna search for OBS, then click on install. It's as easy as that. No more looking for the exact exe file, going through annoyingly long installers, and having to click no on all those ads asking if you want to install McAfee or whatever they're trying to sell you. Since you probably used Windows or Mac before switching to Ubuntu, there are probably some apps or games that you use that don't have native Linux support. Well, not to worry. There are some very talented people who have created tools called Wine and Proton, which allows you to run Windows-only apps on Linux. To install Wine, install both Wine and Winetricks from either the software manager or the terminal. Now you can run .exe files. Keep in mind Wine does not always do the trick, so it might be useful to use Proton. Proton is made by Valve and is specifically meant for playing Steam games, so if you do not play games, or specifically games on Steam, you can skip past this part. If you do play Steam games, keep watching. First install Steam and log in. Then open Steam. Click on the top left where it says Steam, and click on Settings. After that, click on Steam Play, and enable both supported titles and other titles. You might also want to check out the Settings app where you can change some settings like your wallpaper and monitors. But with all that said, thank you for watching my video, and if you learned something, make sure to like and subscribe, as my videos take a long time to make. If you need additional help, please join my Discord server, and I can try my best to help you there.